The radio-controlled hobby has been around since 1938, and as you can probably imagine, there's been a lot of fads that have come and gone. Some of these will be remembered fondly, and some we'd all rather forget. Number 1. Hobbyco. Number 2. Supercharged 4-stroke glow engines. A supercharger, for those less mechanically minded, is a big pump on some engines that forces more fuel and air into it so it makes bigger booms and you go faster. For a while, OS sold a 20cc 4-stroke glow engine that had the same kind of supercharger you might find on a hot rod to make a little bit more power. It was very expensive, pretty cool, but for most people, it made more sense to just buy a bigger engine. Number 3. Glider high starts. How do you get your glider up high enough to do some gliding? The answer for a long time was a high start, either with a winch or a giant bungee of some type. People definitely do still use these, but for most people sport flying, an electric motor with a folding prop is so much more convenient and reliable than a giant slingshot contraption that could kill a bystander. We see the appeal though, and have done it ourselves. It's just been more fun towing our gliders up with a jet, a motorcycle, or another glider than just using a motor. Number 4. Gear reductions. Early electric planes used brushed motors or even high RPM in-runner brushless motors that needed a gear reduction to go slowly enough to spin a prop. A brushless motor on a gear reduction can actually be very powerful and efficient, but for most people, the extra cost, maintenance, and god-awful noise were enough to make everybody switch to our modern outrunners. Number 5. ARC. Almost ready to cover airplanes. When the hobby transitioned from kits to pre-built ARFs, some manufacturers sold planes that were almost ready to cover. It turns out that covering and then assembling an airplane is like 90% of the work, so these didn't make things much easier. These are fairly niche these days and all but rejected by the mainstream. Number 6. Funfly 3D planes. Back when 3D was starting to gain popularity and everybody wanted to hover their airplanes, the default layout had a super thick airfoil, a short tail, and was built as light as possible. These planes could hover, do tight loops, and fly slow, but were pretty bad at everything else. Also, many would flutter themselves to pieces if you went too fast. Modern electric and gas 3D planes fly better, do more, and look better than these, and have largely taken over for affordable 3D. Number 7. Wankel rotary glow engines. Another weird engine, also from OS, was the 30 Wankel. For those unaware, our normal engine is powered by a piston moving in a cylinder, and a Wankel is powered by a Dorito spinning in a peanut. They made a lot of power for their size and weight, but were wildly expensive and used a lot of fuel, just like the ones Mazda put in their cars. Once the novelty wore off, many people went back to normal engines. Number 8. Tricopters. These initially became very popular because they were more stable and smoother than a quadcopter with better yaw control. You'll still see these pop up now and again, but really, any quad built in the last 5 years will fly significantly better than any tricopter ever would. It's still super cool looking back at David Vindestal's tricopter projects though. Number 9. Master airscrew props. These used to be a lot more popular because they are durable and not as ugly as the gray APC props. Unfortunately, they have the thrust of a mouse fart, so they are harder and harder to find in the field, unless you see a Durafly Tundra. For some reason, these plastic planes attract pilots that like Master airscrew. Number 10. Spads. Simple plastic airplane design, made from corrugated plastic, political signs. These were a cheap and easy way to make a really durable plane that was ugly, didn't fly great, but was really tough. These were mostly replaced by EPP foamies, and for good reason too. Number 11. Diesel engines. Diesel RC engines had no spark plug, glow plug, or anything like that, but they didn't actually run on diesel fuel from a gas station. Instead, they ran on a mixture of kerosene, oil, ether, and starting fluid. Just like car diesel engines, they make a little bit more torque. They weren't very popular even before electric and gas took over, possibly due to it being hard to find fuel or looking like a terrorist as you mixed it yourself. Number 12. Snap roll switches. Most transmitters had a momentary switch that you could set up to do a snap roll when you pulled it. Rumor has it a Futaba engineer accidentally pulled his on a landing approach and they were banned. Number 13. JR's 3+1 digital trim. Regular trims on rudder, aileron, elevator, slider trim on throttle, partly because it's nice to have, partly because in the old days, you slid the trim all the way down to shut off the engine, and most people couldn't figure out the throttle cut function to do that instead. Thank God for technology and better OSs. Number 14. Mode 1 transmitters. Throttle and elevator are swapped. It's still used in some places, but rapidly being overtaken by Mode 2 like we fly in the US because of RTFs. It's not gone though. Many still fly it, including Flex Innovation's co-founder, aka the godfather of 3D, Kike Somanzini. Number 15. Single-stick RC transmitters. These have a knob on the aileron elevator stick that you twist for yaw control and a slider on the back of the transmitter for throttle. If you're old enough to remember Craft radios, you might enjoy this picture. The first signature series of Craft transmitters offered a single stick along with an obscene amount of switches and sliders. Even still, helicopter goat Curtis Youngblood still flies with a specially built single-stick transmitter. Number 16. RC helicopter training landing gear. These were big, silly-looking landing gear with wiffle balls on the ends for learning to hover and being able to set the thing back down in various orientations if you panic without damage. They make flybarless controllers go nuts though, so they are going away. And flybarless helis usually have an auto level mode. Besides, with simulators being so popular nowadays, these just aren't as necessary as they used to be. Number 17. Invert switch. RC heli transmitters used to have a switch that would make the yaw, pitch, and collective go backwards so you could flip it inverted, hit the switch, and reverse your controls. This was probably more confusing than actually learning to properly fly it the right way, and as a result, these are pretty rare nowadays. Number 18. Heli versions of transmitters. Transmitters used to be sold in an airplane in heli version. There was a heli-specific programming in the heli version and no throttle ratchet. Chips got cheap and good enough to include all the programming, and now you can just turn the ratchet on or off on modern transmitters. Number 19. Trainers with no ailerons. The idea is the plane should self-level so if the student panics, they could take their hands off the controls and it would fix itself. The issue was that it took a long time, long enough in fact that the plane will probably crash unless you have 1,000 feet of altitude in a half-mile of open space. Ultimately, this will probably cause some debate, which is fine, but just know you're wrong. Number 20. Fuel-injected glow engines. For competition flying, having your engine run absolutely perfectly every time can be a huge advantage, and some people will pay whatever it costs to get that. So, YS made the 140DZ 4-stroke, which had mechanical fuel injection, and OS fired back with the 160 FX FI 2-stroke and FS91 SII FI 4-stroke, which had full electronic control, including temperature and RPM sense for injector timing. They were enormously expensive and not worth it for most people, and went away when electric easily delivered better power and reliability. Number 21. Fast pattern airplanes. Pattern flying is kind of a competition, where you fly aerobatics as precisely as possible. These days, it's done mostly by electric planes that look like a fish at a very consistent medium pace like Adam Sandler suggests. But when it started, planes were heavy, didn't have a lot of power, and looked like jets. And the best way to make them precise was to enter maneuvers at Mach Jesus. This one's not quite dead though. It's seen a big resurgence in recent years for nostalgia's sake or just people looking for something different. Number 22. Innovative pre-built airplanes. These days, most wood airplanes are built by skilled workers in a way similar to how mini kits have been for years. But early on, the factories that did this didn't exist, and lots of people wanted to fly and not build. So, there were quite a few planes that came out already built, but were made in a manner that was more economical than one might want. There were lots of big pieces of plastic, and covering was often just a giant sticker. These things were heavy, fragile, and couldn't usually be fixed. Good riddance. Number 23. Helicopters with no-tail-rotor, aka no-tar. Many old-timers will tell you that helicopters are complicated and hard to fly. Enter the Kyosho Hyperfly. Designed by our friend Dave Herbert, aka Night Flyer, back in 1989, these flew in a constant forward motion with just pitch and roll control like an airplane, making it easy for airplane pilots or even newbies to fly it and to give helis a taste. The tail rotor was essentially replaced by a frisbee, for those curious. They were incredibly popular. These days, coaxial helis or multi-rotors have replaced it for newbies, but in retrospect, it's a pretty sweet idea. Number 24. Prop jets. Suppose you are an average RC pilot and want to fly a jet in the earlier days of RC. Electricity is a fickle bitch that nobody understands. Glow-ducted fans barely work. Turbines are mostly a fantasy. What do? Build a jet and stick a prop on the front of it. Rationalize that you can't see the prop when it's flying. But, of course, you can see the cylinder head and muffler sticking out the front of your F-16 and hear the tiny buzz of a two-stroke. Later, some electrics had the props on the back in a pusher configuration, which is better, but EDFs have taken their place as a cheap and easy ticket to Top Gun cosplay. Number 25. RC forums. Flying Circus, Flying Giants, Watt Flyer, RC Universe, 3D RC forums, Giant Scale News, all shells of their former selves if they are still even up. There are still a couple of the OGs still active, like RC groups, but these days we argue about the best radios, oil, servos, and whether or not the treadmill airplane will take off on Facebook instead of dedicated sites. Honestly, for a lot of things the forums were better because threads with lots of information could stick around for years instead of going away when the algorithm decides nobody wants to see it anymore. Number 26. Rubber banding your wing on. For some reason, the default way to attach a wing for a long time was with a bunch of elastic. It took forever to put the wing on and off, and if you crashed, rather than screw breaking, the rubber bands would rip the fuselage and/or wing apart. That being said, Ben still routinely uses rubber bands for wings for his convenience on scratch builds. Please note that Ben's opinions do not reflect those of Tail Heavy Productions or its subsidiaries as a whole. Paid for by the Wing Screw Gang. There's a lot on this list the hobby could have lived without, but honestly, a lot that the hobby needed at the time, and some of them are kind of fascinating in retrospect. Special thanks to Cody Wojcik for writing this video. We're interested in hearing which ones we missed in the comments below, so be sure to let us know. Go ahead and give this video a like if you think Horizon Hobby should sell the Timber with a diesel engine instead. And maybe even hit subscribe if you're interested in seeing our own gas conversion of a Timber Evo, because that's in the works. Happy landings and bounce one on for us. We'll catch you next week with a new upload.